Hey everyone, you are listening to the Divergent Conversations podcast. We are two neurodivergent mental health professionals in a neurotypical world. I'm Patrick 𝗍𝗲.
And I'm Dr. Neff.
And during these episodes, we do talk about sensitive subjects, mental health, and there are some conversations that can certainly feel a bit overwhelming. So we do just want to use that disclosure and disclaimer before jumping in. And thanks for listening. Hey everyone, welcome back to Divergent Conversations. Today we are still on our Neurodivergent Entrepreneurial series. I'm really excited to have a really good friend and colleague, Yunetta Springs-Smith, on today, who is a keynote speaker, trauma trainer, EMDR certified trainer. I don't know the terminology. Yunetta, you can correct me. A licensed clinician in the state of Tennessee, an entrepreneur with a million ideas, a membership called Groundbreakers, which is helping BIPOC therapists not only heal their own trauma, but learn trauma training modalities themselves. Yunetta, I believe if we were to identify you, you would say that you're undiagnosed ADHD. I would say by knowing you for 5 years that I would 100% agree. Did I miss anything in your bio? And if I did, I'm sorry.
Nope. I think that's primarily everything. Trainer, EMDR trainer, coaching for clinicians, self-care workbooks. I have a self-care workbook, Take the Struggle Out of Self-Care, that folks can get. And also the radio segment. So I do radio segment roughly like monthly now, Talk It Out Tuesday on the Ricky Smiley Morning Show to talk about mental health and help break the stigma. So I think
How
that's all.
nervous are you on a scale of 1 to 10 right now?
Where I'm at, 1 to 10, about a 7.
7, damn. Okay.
And that
Well,
was good. It just hit. As soon as you hit record, it was like, boom.
yeah, like you don't know what you're
Yeah.
talking. Those negative
Yeah.
biases didn't help.
No, they helped tremendously for the moment we were in. But no, I'm good. I'm good. I am also a bird launcher. So I like to classify myself as that. I have a beautiful 19-year-old daughter, and she's amazing. And calling myself an empty nester was extremely depressing. And so after 3 months of like being curled up, like I miss my baby. What is life? I tapped into the term bird launcher, and that felt like so much better for my system to be able to say, you launched a bird and she's flying, and not focus on the emptiness. So that's a big
Oh,
part
my
of who I
goodness.
am too.
I love that. Like, I talk about this a lot, how a lot of the things we say could be described in the negative or the positive. I
Mhm.
hadn't thought about that with empty nester. Like, you could flip it from what is lacking, what is absent, to like
Mhm.
what happened, what
Yeah.
positive energy happened. So
Mhm.
I love that a lot.
Yeah, thank you. It
And
definitely
he's
helped me.
full of good imagery and ideas like that, which I think is a strength of yours. So
Mhm.
can you tell the audience a little bit about like the passion behind the project? So I know a lot about it. Megan does
Mhm.
not. I'd love for you to
Mhm.
kind of just tell us a little bit about like who who you are in current day, how your
Mhm.
neurodivergence has shaped that, and let's take it from there. Because you have so many
Yeah.
good ideas, and usually you send them to me at like 1 in the morning in a flurry of like DMs, and I'm like, Yunetta,
He
pick.
wakes up like, "What the?"
I'm
And
like,
and then his response is like one word, "It sounds amazing, Yunetta." You could do it. Where do we start? Um, but
facts.
yeah. Yeah, my journey has been like, wow, just kind of all over the place. So I feel like at this point in my life, I'm just getting to the point where things are starting to come together and feel more aligned and streamlined. Even though it's a lot happening, it feels like things are coming together. So I always have been super visual, super creative. Um, if you give me something, I can figure out 10 ways to use it. And, that's been my thing. I grew up in church. I grew up like dancing. So I've always had like heard a song and then visualize something and then create this beautiful piece. And if I do something, I'm like, if you don't watch, I don't know what I just did. After I do it, it's gone, So trying to like hone in on that. So growing up in a military community in the hood and some spaces, my transition has been quite unique but similar for some folks. not necessarily understanding or recognizing that I did have childhood trauma, and didn't necessarily get that fully until I got into this field. I just thought I wanted to talk to people. I've always been somebody people can connect with and talk to. And then I was like, oh shit, no wonder. No wonder I identify in these areas. So I've always wanted to kind of be a solution for people who have experienced things that are similar to me, or finding gaps and holes in spaces, and being able to come in and say, how can we repair this? How can we, make this better? So I think throughout my life, I've done that in different ways. And now I'm doing it in the therapeutic space, um, specifically with EMDR. So that has been like a huge part of my journey. When I got trained, I did it because one of my therapist friends said, hey, girl, you want to go to a training? We need some CEUs. And I was like, yeah, I need some. Oh, you get a lot here. We could go. But I didn't know much. I had always worked with trauma, but didn't know much. I just didn't know much about EMDR. And when I went to that training, that was the very first time my emotions and the experience connected. So I was disconnected. I knew the stories, I knew what I experienced. I could tell you and just, know it was awful, but not necessarily feel the somatic connection to it. And that was the first time I had that click and that connection, and it blew my mind. And I was like, what the fuck is this? I need to learn more about it. Then I got angry because I was like, why are there only three Black people in this room? And I know all three of them, And why don't we know more about this, considering the history of trauma, that we've experienced? This could be a great tool to really help us heal. So from that point, I just was like, I'm going to take this all the way. I'm going to go all the way and try to help as many people as I can learn about it, primarily and specifically people of color, because it was something that, a lot of people said, we can't do this with Black folks, so.
Wait, people were saying you can't do this with Black folks?
Yeah,
EMDR?
a lot of folks are like, yeah, that doesn't work for us. A lot of clinicians, just kind of like in the time when I started, there weren't many people of color trained in this therapy. So that connection that's necessary to do the work,
Yeah.
it really wasn't happening as frequently. So representation matters. So even seeing somebody like that looks like you, that has a similar background to you, say, hey, this works for me, then I think that created a lot of interest and buy-in for folks to be able to, want to know more about it.
Yeah. That
Mhm.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
When I think about you, Yunetta, I think about you. I mean, you have a business called Groundbreakers, and that's kind of the
Mhm.
way I look at you, because you have kind of gone through the ringer in terms of becoming a trainer in this modality, where you've
Mhm.
had to struggle a lot throughout the process of like really putting a lot of yourself out there, being really vulnerable, really showing up so that you can create more representation for the BIPOC community to say, hey, we can do this work. We can not
Mhm.
only heal ourselves, but we can heal our communities. And I
Mhm.
think like I've seen the ripple effect within the work you do in terms of how many BIPOC EMDR trainers are starting to come up.
Mhm.
You want to talk about EMDR because I texted you this before we got on here. There can be a
Yeah.
negative association,
Mhm.
especially for autistic folks, in terms of, does it work? Is it effective? Is it harmful?
Mhm.
As someone who is neurodivergent themselves, and as someone who is also a BIPOC trainer, there's a lot of
Mhm.
masking that goes into that experience, I imagine. There's a lot of
Mhm.
code switching. There's a lot of moving through a lot of different spaces and being a lot of different Yunettas. Can you
Mhm.
talk about that and how you use a modality like that to support neurodivergent people and how you kind of adapt?
Yeah, definitely. Oh, so much starting out. I remember listening to one of y'all podcasts. I think it was on my masking. And when I tell you, like, it hit me to my core, I was just like, oh my goodness, being able to hear all of the things that kind of go on internally behind the scenes, and not even being able to really put language and words to what I was actually doing, from that neurodivergent perspective. And then also as being a Black woman in spaces, knowing that there are some people that don't necessarily want you to be there, or if you're there, they want you to be there and be quiet, and what happens, like, I work a lot with, like our nervous system and what type of response that puts you in. I like to talk about the nervous system in terms of like the 5 Fs. I use 5 Fs, which is fight, flight, freeze, flop, and friend. And I think that friend response is a lot that, as a Black woman, navigating these spaces early on, that I felt like I had to do to, sustain, like, oh, if I piss this person off, that's my paycheck. You know what I mean? Oh, if I piss this person off, maybe that may be the referral that I need to be able to continue to move forward in this space. So I've experienced a lot of different things and had to mask, in a lot of different ways. And I think, especially early on, now, not as much, but I notice when it comes up, and giving myself like that grace and compassion, to see whatever it is that's happening in this space. How did that light you up? What is that connected to? And having that understanding that I've learned through EMDR, being able to like connect and trace back to the origin, has helped me to like know what areas I need to continue to work on, or offer love, compassion, kindness to, or accept. So it's definitely been a challenge. And I mean, I could sit here and honestly say I'm extremely proud of myself for how I've been able to move through it. And the parts of me that felt like that was what was necessary for that time, I can understand, how and why, and not harp on it as much as I used to. hmm Did I answer any of your question? Because
You did.
I did. Okay.
You did. Um, Megan and I play this game subconsciously. Are looking at each other out of our peripherals, like, is someone going to hit unmute? So I was doing
Oh,
that.
okay.
And-
No, I was just like, you know how my brain works.
I do. So knowing how your brain works and knowing that this modality has to be adapted and changed and shifted. How are ways that you can change, shift, like adapt something to better support someone's like sensory system, neurotype, etc.? Like, what are some of the
Mhm.
ways that you can do this creatively so it doesn't feel like a one size fits all approach?
Yeah, yeah. And I think when we talk about, and this don't have to be all about EMDR because there's so many different parts, but I think when I think about why I'm so good, and look at me saying that. You heard me just say that. Oh, look at you. Why I'm so good and confident about what I do is my trauma response has been to adapt in some ways, right? So I've learned throughout my life to be able to read the room, right? And be able to see, what is it safe for me to do? What is it safe for me to say? Where is it safe for me to? So that skill was already kind of encoded in me throughout my lifetime, right? So I feel like trauma wounds create, there are ways that we can operate in those wounds as it being like a resource. And then there's ways that we can operate in a way that it can be further impairing, an impairment to how we function. So I think with everything, there's a flip side to it. So me being able to read a room and me being able to see what is safe has really helped me to be able to attune to the people that I'm in the room with. So as I'm doing EMDR, that attunement is present. And it's not, I always say, it's not about me fitting people into a protocol. It's about me learning how this protocol fits into the person. Right. So we're going through things that's saying, how does that feel for you? Tapping. Is that something that's soothing? If it makes you feel like you're scratching a chalkboard, then we're not going to do that. Right. So being able to move through finding what feels good for their system, to be able to integrate some of the resources, being able to, people who have like aphantasia, they can't see imagery, right? Or maybe they can't connect with the emotional part of it. Whatever part they can connect with, that's the way that we move into the work. And it takes time. And it takes knowing that, guess what? I'm not the expert. This person is the expert of their system. And me being able to build their confidence in knowing what they like, what they don't like, what works for them, what doesn't, is really, it can be super reparative. Because most folks who are autistic or most folks who have ADHD have had to live their life like trying to conform and like pushing away what's going on with them to accommodate like neurotypical spaces. So it's almost like we're working on moving backwards and repairing. Like if this was done when you were a baby, we had a conversation in training today, and one of the trainers I'm working with was talking about colicky babies, or maybe this baby was like had autism and didn't the comfort was overstimulating for them. So it's like if your parent had known that hugs and love was overstimulating and just like let you be, then maybe this would not have occurred to where you know what I mean? We're dealing with what we're dealing with now. So that's kind of what helps me be able to kind of allow this to integrate into any person that I work with, because I really take the time to see what it is that feels good for you. What does your system need and why?
I'm having a flurry of thoughts right now. But one thing that came in my mind when you were talking is like you were so good at finding people's access points. Like
Hmm.
how do we get into your inner world? How do we make this modality work for you? I don't know a whole lot about EMDR, but from what I have heard, I've kind of thought of it as a sort of I know it's very structured and kind of a
Hmm.
strict modality. And it's like, well, if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. But I'm hearing
Hmm.
you take it so differently of like, how do we figure out how to make this work with aphantasia? How do we
Hmm.
make this like work with you? And in that is so much, like you're saying, so much reparative attunement of
Hmm.
we're not just going to give up on you if this modality in the way it's
Yeah.
structured doesn't work for you. We'll find your access points.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's like, what does that do for somebody's system? Like even you just saying that, I'm not going to give up on you, right? And how many times has that person had an experience where if you can't sit still, then you just need to go over here instead of saying, what can I help you? What can we do to help you stay engaged in a way that feels good for you? And there's just not a lot of room for that, just traditionally growing up the way our culture and system and school and stuff is. There's just not a lot of room for that. So being able to create space for that. And I think that's just my personal personality too. Like tell me I can't do something. Like I will struggle with something forever until somebody says you can't. Oh, you said sometimes I'm like, hey, Patrick, tell me I can't do this just so I can get what so I can get mad enough to make it happen, right? So that's how I view it. Like, oh, it doesn't work for this. It doesn't work for me, and I want to know. I want to get curious about what didn't work for you. What didn't you like about it? What happened? And usually if you lean into that with curiosity, not in a defensive way, like I'm going to make this work for you, but if you lean in with curiosity, you'll be able to find what it was. And it's like, no wonder it didn't work for you. Like, yeah, that wouldn't work for me if I didn't like that and somebody did it, duh, right? But the clinician has to be able to lean in with curiosity. And I think a lot of times clinicians have this sense of, I'm the expert and I have to be perfect. And if something is not working in my space, it has to be that other person. It can't be me. And that's when you're dealing with your own shit and not self-aware that you're in this space too. So if something isn't working, it's something that both, on both ends that's happening. You got to get curious about what that is.
Yeah, I love that. I had a
Mhm.
reaction, physical reaction when you were talking about like people who couldn't sit still. You just get thrown over there,
Mhm.
and I'm like, yeah, that's me every second, every
Yeah.
day. But I like that perspective on something because I think it is about just like leaning in with curiosity, being really open to the experience, and like not looking at these things in a black and white context. And I think that's super important too. So it doesn't feel so
Mhm.
rigid. So it doesn't feel like
Mhm.
it's very constricting or confining.
Yeah.
And I can speak to experience. I've been in person with you where you're like, let's try some of these skills. And I'm like, I'm not really open to that. And you're like, come on, I'll just be like curious about why. And ultimately able to like anchor in and like at least ground and regulate at times when feeling very, very overwhelmed. So
Mhm.
I can speak to that firsthand. Um, Curious, I want to diverge a bit into like your entrepreneurial journey. So we're speaking specifically of like a training that you've put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into, but you do a hell of a lot more than that.
Mhm.
And sometimes from the outside perspective, as a friend of yours, it probably looks like chaos. And I think it
Mhm.
does feel like chaos for you.
Mhm.
Can you
Yeah.
talk about the creative process and like light bulb moment, big idea, then what happens usually?
Yeah. Ooh, wait, it is chaos, and it's not usually not organized either. You know, some people say it's organized chaos. It's chaotic, but I know where it is. For me, there's like that's bullshit. But yeah, so it looks like lots of great ideas, like almost as if I just wish I could give this idea to somebody to execute it. Because for me, my challenge, I'm aware of it, is execution. So lots of great ideas, but not necessarily the steps of what it takes to make that idea happen really fully fleshed out. And then when I get into the steps of what it takes, then it loses the charge, the excitement, and then it falls flat sometimes. Or it's like that needing to the pressure of like waiting till it's like right there and you got to do it. So that's a lot of what I experience. And so I've had to work around a lot about like if you get an idea, have space to hold it and then sit on it. And if you're still excited about it, come back around and see if it's feasible. But you know, there's that stress and anxiety that comes like if I don't do it now, then it'll go forever and I won't, be able to do it. So I'm learning to do that. I think it looks like I think I mentioned this before, and this is one of the things that I'm actively working on doing. When I have so many ideas, I build out, right? So I have all of these things, but it stretches me. And then I feel burnt out in that capacity. And where I am now is like trying to find a way to build up, right? So that I can kind of see these things through. And it doesn't necessarily stretch me as much. I think the chaos that's within, and maybe Patrick, because you're in my friend group bubble, you see a lot more of the chaos than other people see. Like externally, I feel like, oh, your stuff is amazing and you're doing great and you're on all of these platforms and stuff, but they don't really see the level of anxiety that I feel prior to doing something, or how I've had to work really hard to be able to manage I enjoy doing the things. It's not like I don't like doing it, but what comes with it, sometimes it's a lot.
I really appreciate you sharing that. And that, like, that's something I feel a lot is the disconnect of what I have learned I look like from the outside to my
Hmm.
internal experience. And I imagine this is true for a lot of neurodivergent entrepreneurs, creators of like our lives can look really put together or polished. And then it's like my team would like, they see how messy I am and they're like, oh goodness, let's help you get organized.
Hmm.
And it's like, yeah, people, and even in like the comments people leave or what they wouldn't realize the internal
Hmm.
like strain and stress and anxiety that goes into it. Um, yeah. So that disconnect, I'm glad you picked up on that. I feel
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, for sure.
I experience that all the time, like, and I made a post about this yesterday. Like, so many people look at the things that I create or the things that I do with like, what's the word term? Rose colored glasses. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's
Hmm. That's
Mhm.
it.
like, oh, look at Patrick hosting these events and traveling the world. That's like 2% of my life. 98% of my life is spent in darkness and solitude with the shades closed, very lonely, depressed, alienated, like feeling disconnected. And the only time I
Mhm,
feel connected is when I'm creating. But then I
mhm,
have to try to recharge to get that spark back to be able to create. And then
mhm,
if my executive functioning takes a hit, which it typically does, if I look at a list of steps of things to do, I immediately just shut down and I'm like, I can't
mhm,
do it. Or I have to delegate it. But then I get really impatient because it's not being done fast enough, but I don't know how to do it, and that
mhm,
leads to like complete and utter, it's not paralysis, I don't wanna use that word,
mhm,
um,
To
but it
like
is
collapse.
really, yeah, exactly, it's collapse. Yeah,
Yeah.
mhm.
it's
Yeah.
collapse. And I collapse,
Yeah.
laying on my couch watching the same 4 shows over and over and over again, thinking about all of the ideas that I wanna put out into the world, but unable to actually follow through on them, whether it be because of executive functioning, the inability to know what steps to do. Someone
Mhm.
sent me a laundry list of steps on how to self-publish a book the other day. I looked at it for 10 seconds and I immediately was like, "No, there's no
Yeah.
fucking way I'm doing this." Like, there's
Yep.
just no way.
Yeah. And I think it's like it's almost like, so when I view things, I view it as, the visual that I'm getting is like that wiring. So I talk a lot about like wiring and rewiring and what that looks like. And I think when it comes to what we need, when you think of like that neurodivergence perspective and then that nervous system, like how they're so like interconnected. And what I love about what we do with EMDR is like looking at the belief that we have about ourselves because of what is showing up, right? And that could be attached to anything, and that can kind of shift and change. Like we can rewire that to make it more adaptive, and making something more adaptive doesn't change what's happening. Right. So that doesn't change that, oh, I need to recharge or I'm sitting but what you think, feel, and believe about yourself because you do that changes. You know what I mean? And I think before doing some of this work, there could be like a lot of guilt and shame that you hold to, like you look at yourself and have and hold because, oh, I'm doing these great things, but then I'm in the dark and I'm feeling really low. And there could be a lot of guilt and shame attached to that. Or it could be, oh, I'm honoring myself and this is what my system needs. And I can give myself what I need, or I'm worthy of having the time and space to be able to do this for myself. You know what I mean? So I think as I'm growing and learning more about this, I'm seeing that it's not necessarily that I need to change and I need to stop doing this. It's what I think, feel, and believe about myself because I do that. And that's what we can alter.
I love that so much. I feel like a broken record. I say this a lot, but like the story we tell ourselves matter. Like it matters so much. And it's not about some sort of toxic positivity of like denying our experience, but it is really that of what is the story I'm telling it when I'm sitting in the dark and recovering, right? Is it like I'm so
like I'm broken or
I'm
damaged
broken or like
wrong with me.
Yeah. Versus I'm taking care of myself right now.
Yeah. And worthy of that, like the worthiness or I value myself enough to be able to give myself what I need when I need it without like that guilt, shame, remorse,
Yeah. My favorite self-compassion statement, I've followed Dr. Kristen Neff's work some, and there's a lot of self-compassion statements that I'm like, I could never say that to myself and like actually take it in. But here's one I can, and I use it a lot, is this is a hard moment. And because it names it. So I could also imagine be like, this is a hard moment and I'm taking care of myself right now. Like both naming this is a hard moment and I'm choosing to like lean into care.
Yeah. Dan Siegel has a phrase like name to tame.
Yeah.
So when we can name what it is, it tames the distress that we have and we could settle in it. And I love that because that's like that name to tame. It's like not naming that it'll be okay and I'm fine, right? It's like, no, this is hard. And just by doing that, my system can stabilize and say, I'm really acknowledging like where you are right now.
Yeah. Exactly. Have you heard of the tarantula study? So this is like one of my favorite studies. Okay, I'm going to nerd out for a minute.
Love it.
And I did a review right before hopping on, which is like my thing I don't like is like inaccurately referencing studies.
Oh, girl, listen.
So there's a study and they took people who had phobias of spiders and they had a tarantula in a cage and they had them see how close they could get to the spider. And they put them in, I think it was actually 4 groups. So one was probably a control group. One was like a CBT reframing, like the spider can't hurt me. And then another group was distraction. And then the other group was name your emotions. Like I'm experiencing fear right now. And they then had them come back and do it again. And they were measuring, they had some biofeedback to measure both stress response, but also to see how close they could get to the spider. And it was the group that was naming their emotions, right? Not reframing, not distracting, simply being like, I'm feeling anxious right now. That was the group that could get the closest to the spider and had the less stress response. And I just love that study because it's like, like naming our emotions has so much power and we don't have to, sometimes reframing can be helpful, but we don't have to like frantically be like trying to convince ourselves it's not a hard moment. We can
Mhm.
name that it's a hard moment.
Yeah, yeah. And when I look at that, you describing that makes so much sense because in order, like our brain has the capacity to heal, but all systems got to be firing, right? And active for us to do that. So the naming of it is, not necessarily specifically, but more of that left brain orientation, being able to list and logical, top brain, prefrontal, being able to like frame it. And then the emotional part, right, allows us to have that integration where I'm using my whole brain to be able to pick up what this experience is like for me. And when I can do that, then I can heal, stabilize, and be able to move through anything. So I love that. That's good.
I love what you just did with that of like what we're doing when we're naming to tame it is we're integrating. We're
hmm
integrating our brain because
hmm
we're not just being cognitive and
hmm
we're not getting kind of flooded in the emotion. We're
hmm
having an integrative moment. I love like the idea of integration, but I
hmm
hadn't connected those two ideas. So thank you
hmm
for that.
Yeah, thank you. I love the tarantula. I'll find a way to, incorporate that into, as
It's a
an
great
example.
study. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I asked you when you got
I
on
still
here.
don't want to be around no fucking tarantulas now.
Me neither.
I don't care how much I can name it. I
No,
still
I don't want any of that. But that's why I asked you how nervous you were to start this episode. And
Yep.
I do that constantly when I'm speaking at conferences or retreats. Like it's the first thing that I do is I am noticing how anxious I am, feeling
Mhm.
like my heart is going to beat out of my chest, really
Mhm.
struggling to even catch my breath to speak without like sucking wind almost. And just
Mhm.
name it, like how anxious and overwhelmed I'm experiencing this moment. It really allows you to like drop in and settle in
Yep.
because it allows you to say like, I am anxious. I am nervous about this. I'm still experiencing it, but I'm not going to let it like
Mhm.
control how I move forward. And I really love using that as a tactic and a strategy for a lot of things. And we'll probably do that in Italy and all future events. Like it's just
Mhm.
part of calming my nervous system.
Yeah, yeah. And it's beautiful when you can be authentic about where you are, because there were some times in spaces where I would be like, I'm fine. So being able to say, no, like a seven, that's up there. Where's that? Where's it landing in my body? It's all in my chest right now. I know what my chest. So I think for like, I keep going back to EMDR. I'm just gonna do it. That's how my brain works. But I think it helps when you've already mapped out what this is connected to. And when you can check in with the feeling in the present, you know what it's connected to in the past, right? That's like the three prongs we use. You know what is connected to the past, and then you're consciously aware that I don't have to let this impact my future the way that, I'm fearing that it will. I could still move through this experience. I was just telling someone yesterday actually about big keynote speaking engagement that I had, my very first keynote, right? And at this point, me and Patrick were like new, like friendships that were new. And this is when he was like around the same time, he was like, "You got ADHD. That's time blindness. That's like everything that I would present as an issue." He's like, "Yeah, that's actually this, Yunetta." And I'm like, "Really?" So I was doing a keynote, and when I tell you, I move a lot. When I'm talking, and I had all of this like nervous energy, and I was trying, pushing through it. Patrick got up in the middle of the keynote and had a stress ball. He just threw it at me. He just stood up and threw it, and I just caught it, and it was like this thing. And instantly, when I caught it, it was just like stabilization. So I had a way to kind of still get the info out and stem and like be cool. And I was like, how did you know that like in that moment that that's what I needed? I didn't even know that's what I needed, but he did that. So I kind of thought about that. I mentioned it the other day.
That's amazing attunement. That could have gone so badly. You could have just
I know.
like
Hit
thrown
me in the
the ball.
head. Like hit me in the face or
Yeah.
something, or trip trying to catch it.
To be fair, I didn't like throw it overhand. I wouldn't like
He tossed it.
this,
Yeah.
But
But
yeah, it would have really sucked
if I didn't catch it.
well, hit you square in the face and completely just unraveled your speech
Whole
and your
presentation.
yeah.
You would
just-
not be friends right now. We would not be having this conversation
We
right now
wouldn't.
if it had gone that
Like
way.
a jerk, he just hit me in the face in the middle of my speech.
I won't do the same thing in Scotland.
Mhm.
That's another, thing that you didn't talk about, and I think
Oh
you're one
yeah.
of those people who tend to like keep these accomplishments hidden or smaller than they should be. And Yunetta is our keynote in the Scotland summit that I'm hosting next July, and
Mhm.
I think having seen you speak publicly multiple times, you're one of the most engaging public speakers I've ever experienced, and I just want to name
Thank you.
that right now as we're sitting here because
Mhm.
for me, I've learned so much in terms of how you show up and what you present and how you show up to the world. And I just give you a ton of credit because I know behind the scenes that inner critic can be really harsh and it can create a lot of stress and overwhelm. And
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
thank you,
just,
Brian.
yeah.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Unetta and I refer to these as gut punch moments where she's like, "Do I need to gut punch you right now?" And your inner critic is telling you you suck at A, B, and C, and you've done it a million times. I'm like, Facebook actually banned several of our posts because it said we were
Yeah.
violence.
They
So
were gonna like
more
disable
of
my
that.
account for inciting violence. And I was like, okay, we gotta think of another way to say gut punch without
Yeah. Yeah.
get my page shut down. So thank you. Thank you for that. I definitely appreciate it, receive it. And I enjoy that being able to have that opportunity to travel and to speak. There's that part they could be like, oh, they're just asking me to speak because we're friends and we've developed this friendship. And, that imposter can come in and, but having done it a few times, seeing like the reviews that come, from the participants as a result, and being able to like see people really resonate with it and, see themselves differently, move differently in their business has been incredibly rewarding and helpful to my growth, so I love it. Don't stop hiring me, okay? Because I still got a couple more places I want to go.
Sure. I'll make a notation on that. Real quick as we're kind of wrapping,
Hmm.
um, we went over EMDR, we went over keynote speaking, we went over your workbook.
Hmm.
I want you to kind of tell the audience about Groundbreakers because I think that's one of the
Yeah.
most important pieces of the entrepreneurial journey for you because of the vision behind it. So
Hmm.
tell people what it is and why you created it because I think it's really powerful.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. So my practice is spring forth counseling. So spring is my middle name, and I'm big on like meaning. So it's like
What was your last name for so long? Just so
I
you know.
know.
Yeah.
I like to confuse people. I get confused. I don't know whether I want to go by Yunetta Spring, Yunetta Smith, Yunetta Springs. But so we just putting them together now. I'm just using it all, and it's very long and annoying sometimes, but I'll figure it out. But when I created that practice, it was about supporting people like navigate changes and how helping them to grow and be able to spring forth right into new spaces. But then when I got into the EMDR space, I realized like some people can't spring forth because what their lived experience is like, their history, their background, culture, demographic. There's so many systemic things that are keeping them down and like blocking their ability to spring forth. So then I was like, we need to break ground. Like I want to be able to break it up from the top to open it up, so that people can grow, so be able to break it. So that's what Groundbreakers came from, like being able to break ground for individuals who are marginalized and in spaces where they just don't have access to be able to, have their needs met or be able to heal. So I started with a directory and I wanted to be able to identify as many Black and Brown folks who were trained in EMDR. A lot of people who want to be consultants because there's a process of getting trained, getting certified, becoming a consultant. If you don't have somebody that's willing to take you on as a consultant in training, then there's barriers to you being able to get to that point. If you're not linked up with someone who has an organized training, organization, there's just so many barriers to people being able to move through this structure of EMDR or the organization that governs everything. So I wanted to let people know that BIPOC clinicians are accessible all over the country. I think I got a couple people in Canada now as well, and that's still growing. And I made it free because originally I had like a small fee, but yeah, it really wasn't worth me keeping up with taking the money. So I made it free to be able to make EMDR accessible to folks. And then as far as people having a consultant that understands the population that they work with, that was an issue as well. So you're telling me to use this intervention in a way that doesn't work with the people I work with, and they're walking away feeling like EMDR doesn't work. But I know from my perspective as a Black woman, if this lady is ranking her distress at a 2, but she saw her whole family murdered, maybe it's because she's learned to have to desensitize from those experiences. So that doesn't mean she can't do EMDR. That means we have to do a lot of reparative work. So the way I approach EMDR is really looking at it from the ground up. And what did this person not receive? What do they not know? And how do we start with that preparation there to be able to get them to maybe full standard processing? So that was the reason why I created Groundbreakers, to be able to represent and highlight EMDR clinicians, help them find consultants, and be able to create trainings that were specific to that population. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty cool stuff. And it's still lots of work to do with it. Even talking about it helps me see, like, you need to pour into this water this a little bit more, you know. So,
It's so powerful. I love
yeah,
hearing you talk about that.
thank
And
you.
I hear, so I'm also a visual thinker. And so
Mhm.
I partly just love listening to you talk because the visuals are so poignant. I loved the term groundbreakers, but then when you explain it, it's just, I love the connection of you've got to do that work to be able to spring forward.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
really
And
powerful.
a lot of times, you know, with communities of color, marginalized communities, there's a sense that you aren't well because you don't want to be well,
Mm,
right? And there's so much focus on what you're not doing without understanding the roots and the origin of
mm,
how this way of being has allowed me to survive up until this point. So you stripping me away of all of that is really going to be more activating than
yes.
helpful, right? So how do I help you get to that space of healing and honoring that what you have to do to get there is what you have to do to get there because of your lived experience?
You said something earlier that I wrote down because I hadn't heard it conceptualized
Mhm.
like this before. This idea that, and it reminded me. So Patrick, I think it was on the masking episode. We talked about it's kind of a dark, like it was a heavy moment of like, so did we become therapists because of our trauma, like because of
Mhm.
adapting? What you said of like when it becomes a resource versus impairing, like this
Mhm.
thing, I like being highly adaptable because of your like childhood and your traumatic experiences. The idea of teasing that out, and instead of it's like this is good or bad, it's like
Mhm.
sometimes this is a resource that is helpful for me and sometimes
Mhm.
it's impairing.
Mhm.
I really like that framework.
Mhm.
Because it
Yeah.
captures the nuance of this of yeah, we develop coping strategies to survive. Some of them are adaptive at one point and then can be maladaptive. And then we're adults and we're like, well, what do I do with this now that I understand why this behavior is here?
Mhm.
Um, so I just really like the nuance that you bring to that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what makes it a benefit or an impairment is where I am in my nervous system when I execute that, right? So if I am in my ventral vagal and I'm open and calm and relaxed and stabilized, then I can move through that wisdom and that, that insight, self-awareness in a way that's healthy, and adaptive. But if I'm in my sympathetic nervous system, or if then what I do in that is going to look completely different. So I think that's like, if you're wondering, trying to figure out, like, how do I know if I'm moving in an adaptive way, or if I'm just kind of repeating those trauma wounds and trying to prevent something bad from happening, right? Or feeling overly responsible for others, then I think knowing where you are in your nervous system kind of can let you know
Hmm.
how you're moving through it as well.
Oh, I adore that. I like nervous system mapping a lot, and that as an indicator, especially for me who has I have a bit of alexithymia, so
Hmm.
it would be hard for me to be like, well, I'm having this emotion right now, so is this adaptive or is
Yeah.
this maladaptive? But I can more easily identify my nervous system state. And so
Mhm.
and it's so concrete. So I
Mhm.
like that as kind of a tell of like,
Yeah.
how is this behavior showing up right now? Yeah.
Mhm. Yep. I love that. I love that. I do that with the mapping with all of my folks.
Hmm.
We map
Hmm.
out where you are when you're in dorsal, what's your language around it, how it shows up in all of these areas. So, like for me, I just ate a whole bag of nerds, gummy cluster nerds.
You ate
I
so
got
many
some
of those in Ireland. God.
pocket, man. I was whipping about because it was like, where are they coming from? I was like, I got a pocket full of them. So being able to check in and say, oh, let me lean into this. I see what I'm doing. Let me check in with myself and see where I am, you know. But sometimes I'm there just when I'm in a happy like kid place. I'm like eating candy with like my fun kid stuff. So I was like skipping in Ireland, eating nerd ropes. So I really wasn't activated there, but
Dancing
it's
on a
it's
wall
important to know.
overlooking a cliff, like, with no care in the world. As my friend Kayleen and I are like, "Yunetta, please don't fall right now." But you were
It
in your
was fine. The angle of where y'all were made it look really dangerous because when I looked at the picture, I was like, oh, yeah, that does look. But where I was, it wasn't like a hill. It was like this. And then it went over. I would have been fine. Even if I fell off, I wouldn't have rolled down the hill, hopefully.
I had rolled down the hill. I would have liked to get it on video so we could laughed at.
As I die, so you can
Well,
document my death.
what I think we did in this episode, which I thought you two would really connect and potentially collaborate on something in the future because I think your personalities and your ideas really, really jive together.
Mhm.
Two, I think we just created an episode that allows for people to take a step back with the immediate like reaction of EMDR is harmful to maybe
Mhm.
look at things in a very different perspective if applied differently from people who are parts of marginalized communities who understand masking, who understand that this is not a black and white approach.
Mhm.
Um, I was a bit worried if we talked about EMDR, what the feedback is going to be when we post this
Mhm.
episode, but I think we did it in a way that's super nuanced for those of you who
Mhm.
listen to more than just a 60-second reel on Instagram. Otherwise, but I really appreciate your perspective, Yunetta, because it's just refreshing. And like Megan said, all of the imagery that I unfortunately just really have a hard time connecting to, I really do
Mhm.
appreciate the enthusiasm behind it, and I can connect to the emotion behind what you're saying. So,
Mhm. Yeah,
I don't know where I'm going with this. I just wanted to name that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think I love what we just created in this space, just talking and kind of merging ideas and getting things going. That's why I love that. I love what happens in the moment of flow. All the anxiety that comes beforehand, but like when you just get in a conversation, I
Yeah.
just love the natural unfolding of what comes out of that. So, mhm.
Are you still at a 7 of 10?
No, not at all. I'm good. Okay, I'm checking in a little bit, probably like around 2, because I know we're wrapping up. And I know I typically have a difficult time with being able to
Transition.
that pitch part of how can you connect with me? And I always feel like, so that's what I'm noticing. But I'm good.
The pitch part is always so awkward. I always struggle with
Hmm.
that too when I'm on
Yeah.
people's podcasts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
The pitch part and the bio.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I forget to list like important things. I'm like, oh yeah, I just forgot to like link my podcast or my offer. Like I just
Hmm.
overlook it and glance at it. But great conversation. And speaking of pitch part, tell the audience where they can
Give
find
us your
you.
pitch.
We'll
Yeah.
also link
So
it
you
in the
can
show notes
find
for
me
anyone
on
who listens.
all as the lovely um, lady is knocking on my door to come clean the space and opening it now. I'll be right out. Thank you. Just a moment.
When you're
Un
podcasting from
momento, por
Bell
favor.
in Milwaukee.
I know. I had to say I had to think, how do I say 30 minutes in Spanish? And she was like, oh yeah. I was like,
Oh,
you
hold
still
on.
got it.
Let me interrupt. So when we were in Spain last year, Yunetta decided that she wanted to try to read every menu item imaginable in Spanish to the point of the waiter slash waitress and all of the guests who were very hungry just looking at her like,
if you
shut
don't if you
up.
don't stop so we can order our food. I was like, no, I'm gonna read this. And oh, it's so funny. It was funny. So everyone can find me at YunettaSpring.com, Yunetta Spring Smith on all social media platforms. Groundbreakers Therapy is my groundbreakerstherapy.com or Groundbreakers Therapy on all platforms if you're looking for an EMDR therapist. I do have 2 more trainings this year, one in August, which is virtual, and it's a 2-part. You can find that on the site. And then I have a 5-day in-person in Mississippi. So if you want to come to Mississippi for a 5-day hangout, it's Mississippi, but it's in a good location and there's food, restaurants around, hotel has a pool, it's clean. I checked it out. That's the last one I went to. I thought I was going to be on the episode of First 48, but I survived to see another day. So anyway, I digress. You can find me on all those platforms. Take the Struggle Out Self-Care. It's on Amazon, and you can get my book there and just connect with me. If you want to get more insight on EMDR, you can text EMDR to 33777 to join my mailing list, and I send messages out every Friday.
That's impressive. I need to get me one of those situations going on. All of that information will be in the show notes so that you have easy access to everything Yunetta just listed. Transcripts are also available on our website. We get a lot of questions about where are the transcripts. Every single episode on our website at divergentpod.com has all of the transcripts. And we also upload all of these videos to YouTube. Yunetta, thank you so much for being on here. I love you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Love you too. So great to chat with you, Megan. I love your brain.
I really adore your brain as well. And I hope we get to have more conversations.
Yes, I'm very much so open to it. All right.
Divergent Conversations podcast is out on Fridays on all major platforms, YouTube. Like, download, subscribe, and share. Goodbye.